All right, we got Daniel in North Carolina. Pronouns are he, him. How's it going?
Hey, how's it going, JMike?
It's going on. I'm sleepy today, but I'm waking up now, so I think I'm good.
Awesome. Yeah, so I don't know how much of that video you want to rehash. When you were asking the Christian, and this was, I guess, my main point of contention, when you asked the Christian about world A, world B, throwing the baby off the roof, would it be right or wrong, depending on whether God exists? I actually disagreed with them when they said that it would be wrong in both worlds, and I agreed with your response to them, because logically, if it's wrong in both worlds, then that undermines God as being necessary for morality, right? My main argument, I guess, was that in world B, if there is no God, the logical question would be, what makes it wrong? And I guess I'm basing that on the fact that if there is no God, if there is no transcendent authority above us, then man becomes the arbiter of what is right and wrong. We decide for ourselves, whether you want to put that individually or as societies or whatever, right?
But I don't think that follows, right? It doesn't follow that because God doesn't exist, or we highlight this possible world where there, one thing is, I guess to ask is, do you think that there's a logical contradiction in the idea of a world where there are moral facts, not just dependent on what I think, but stance independent moral facts, true regardless of what you think about? There's an obligation, torturing babies for fun is wrong, and if you are out of accord with that, you're getting some moral facts wrong. Do you think that there's any logical contradiction from that? I'm just wondering if you think, at a bare minimum, if you think it's logically possible that there could be a world without God and still moral facts obtain.
No, I would say that in a world in which God does not exist, there would be no overarching, what I would call absolute morality. I think that apart from God, morality would be reduced to a very...
Sorry, what I'm specifically asking is, do you think that there is a logical contradiction? That's what I'm asking. That's the question I'm asking. Do you think that it entails a contradiction, like a proposition and its negation, right? Like it's raining and it is not raining, right? Do you think that that's entailed by a world where God does not exist, but there are moral facts?
Yes, I would say so, because from the Christian,
what is that?
Morality flows from God.
What is that contradiction? Right? Because in order for us to get through this view, one thing that I'm detecting is that you have this huge issue, because you're stating it to me, you have an epistemic question. You're asking, how do we know, what grounds it if it without God? That's an epistemic question, which we could get to. By the way, we might just not know how to know the moral facts. It wouldn't negate, right? We don't know things about certain things in physics. It doesn't negate that there aren't celestial objects that we haven't discovered yet, right? Just because we have some epistemic limitations. So I'm wondering on the actual way the world is, right? If you say that it's a contradiction, that there's a world where God doesn't exist, and in conjunction with that world, there are moral facts. If you think that that's not possible, you have a couple options. You can say it's not metaphysically possible, whatever that's supposed to mean. You can say it's not nomologically possible, which is laws, right? Violates some law of nature. Or you could say it's a logical impossibility. But if you say it's a logical impossibility, my next question is going to be, what's the contradiction? Because I'm not really concerned about what the epistemic question is. I'm worried if me and you can agree whether or not it's even possible that there could be a world with God and with not. And the reason why I phrased it to the other person is because he started out the conversation with God is necessary for it. And the reason I phrased it to him was I knew he was going to agree with me, because I've talked to John in the past. I knew he was going to agree with me that torturing babies is wrong even if God didn't exist. I was showing an internal inconsistency on his view. You might not hold that same issue, right? It's an internal critique. So in order, though, if your focus is not necessarily on the internal critique, but it's on externally, it's on how do atheists ground morality, the first question we need to ask is if you even think it's possible.
Yeah, and to be fair, I was responding to one little clip. I realized that, so I may not have even had the full context. But no, sure. I don't think that it is possible to have an absolute morality without God.
Okay, convince me of that.
And
like I don't see any real quick, because in order for someone to say, like, people will say an infinite regression is impossible, and they'll say it's logically impossible. They'll say a lot of things are impossible. Right. But one question is it impossible? Like it violates a law of nature? Because like an iron bar floating in water might violate a law of nature, but there's no contradiction, right? Like if just like anything, like monkeys flying out my butt is logically possible, right? It's a very, very low bar to meet. Very, very low bar for logical possibility. Very low. Like Darante could like pop out of my nose, right? That's like it's logically possible. It's insane. Probably not physically possible. Probably not nomologically possible. But if you are detecting this very low bar that's not even logically possible, it's really important for me for you to convince me of that. You have to give me some argument or some logical derivation that shows I can't put those propositions in conjunction, because it's like saying it's raining and it's not raining. But it's not clear to me that if I'm an atheist that believes in moral realism and believes God doesn't exist, it's not clear to me that I'm violating any law of nature. It's not clear to me that I'm violating any metaphysical principle, whatever that means. And it's not clear to me that I'm committing any contradiction.
Right. Okay. I think I see what you're saying, and I'm going to back up on that just a step.
Yeah. And by the way, sorry for talking so long there.
Oh, you're good, man. You're good. I want to hear what you have to say. Yeah. So I'm going to take a step back on that. I'm not sure if I could say it's a logical impossibility. I did have a question for you just to kind of clarify and see where we're at. Do you believe, when you speak of morality, do you believe that absolute morality exists sort of apart from what we as humans decide? Like if every person on the planet decided that throwing the baby off the roof is okay, would it still be wrong?
Well, there's not going to be an issue if you just like imagine a world where it's just me and Darante and we push each other and we agree, hey, that's wrong, we shouldn't do that, and we add a person into the world. Every minute someone comes in the world and we push them, and we all end up agreeing like, hey, we're not going to push each other, that's wrong, don't do that. Does it follow that we are in accord with some independent fact? No. It could just be the case that we have similar phenomenological experiences. We share a very similar nature. And so, of course, we're going to have overlapping, like, desires and things that hurt us and stuff like that. So it could still be true that moral realism is false, even though we just all agree, because we share a similar nature, right? We have similar experiences. So it would be weird for us to not agree on certain things, right?
Right. But I guess my question is, do you believe that morality is strictly based on what we decide? Are we the origin?
Oh, you're asking me my view. Yeah, I'm a moral anti-realist. I think that moral facts are made true by desires and preferences of an individual or society, the relative to an individual or society. But like pointing out that, oh, you can't say someone is wrong objectively, you're pulling out a concept that I don't think exists, right? What damage is that supposed to do to my view? You know what I mean? Right. I don't think it makes sense to talk about stance-independent obligations. I don't even know what somebody's expressing when they say, independent of what you think, you ought not do X. I don't even know what they're expressing. The same way I don't know what they're saying. Independent of the spaghetti you ate, you ought to have ate lasagna. What the fuck does that mean? It only makes sense if my desires, like to eat the lasagna, like, or something like, I thought it was a better food, and so therefore, yeah, I should eat the lasagna. That would make sense.
Right. And I think that may be where we clash, because in the Christian worldview and the biblical worldview, throwing the baby off the roof would be wrong, regardless of what people think, regardless of how people feel about it. So in the reason that goes back to your argument about the baby in the roof is, as a Christian, I hold that we derive morality from God. It's morality is a reflection of his nature, and being made in his image, we possess some of that morality, even though it's warped at times by sin and all, which I know you guys don't believe that. That's my view. In the world where there is no God, man himself becomes the judge, the arbiter of what's right and wrong. So if everybody in that world decided to throw the baby off the roof, no one could say that it's absolutely wrong for them to do so.
Yeah, but this is why you're wrong. I'm not the only atheist in the world, and I want Darante to come in here and give maybe Darante is a moral realist, right? Like, because let me ask you, how much of the metaethical, and I'm not doing this to shame you or anything like that. I'm just doing this just because there is a landscape, right? And we should explore the landscape, whether we agree or disagree. There's a landscape to be explored. how much of the metaethical literature have you read? And it's not to shame you. I'm just honestly, how much have you read of the metaethics?
Not a lot, honestly.
So yeah, and if you look at like surveys of academic philosophers, I don't like pull this. A lot of people do this, but the survey has a lot of people that are atheists. And if you look at the God question, 73% of philosophers are atheists, or 78 or whatever it was. And so a lot of that percentage is going to be moral realists that are atheists. There are plenty of moral realists that are atheists. So like me, I'm not going to be, I'm not a realist, right? I don't even know that the concept makes sense from a theist perspective. I also think the Christian view, I think your view is anti-realism because it's dependent on God's stances. So it's like not any different than my view, where the truth maker is the desires or the nature of that person, right? That's making those propositions true just based on how their nature is, right? I do that. I have psychological facts about me. I have some nature and I determine what I think is right or wrong. So it's not clear to me that your view is realism. But the people that are expressing realism are people saying, hey, there are moral facts that are true independent of what you think. And then nowhere in there do you need a mind. Why would you need a mind? No realist that's an atheist would ever agree that you need a mind behind it. It's precisely what they're denying. They're saying it's true independent of minds. So you're not going to have much force against like a Cornell or a Jackson realist or someone who like really is doing real work to try to defend moral realism.
I would say that the atheist who holds that view would be inconsistent with atheism. I think that atheism, which I realize atheism is just simply not believing in God, but I think that without that grounding factor, that sort of absolute standard to determine what is right, what is wrong, what is good, what is bad, we're ultimately left with a total subjectivism, a total relativism. So if your neighbor down the street decides to go on a murder spree, you can't point at him and say, hey, that was absolutely wrong what he did. It may be wrong.
Moral realist could say that. A moral realist could say that. Darante, you want to come in? I'm sorry to cut you off, but I want to get Darante in. A moral realist could say that. They would say that to you. You're just begging the question against their view. That's all you're doing. No offense.
Yeah, I think for me, this one is always difficult because, we say, okay, humans can't have an absolute morality, but you also believe that God can have an absolute morality. What is the standard for God's absolute morality? The idea is that, if I understand this correctly, it's just because the Bible says God is upright and righteous. And then when you do that, then you have to wrestle with God's morality being a drowner of children, a person who advocates dashing children against the rocks, and a person who advocates proving your love for him by pretending or, preparing to sacrifice your own son. How do we get to the place where we say that is or should be the standard of morality? And I'd like to add to that, if we are, as many of us atheists believe, that we are in a world where there is no God, then how do you explain the morality that we have without just presupposing, because I believe there is a God, that's where the morality comes, without actually having to demonstrate that the morality does come from God. Because even looking at our own evolutionary understanding of morality, much of what we understand about what is moral today is in absolute contradistinction to the character of the biblical God.
Right. And there's a couple of things there you said that I could respond to. The last part where you talked about the argument is not that you have to believe in God to have morality. I just want to clarify that, but that God must exist. So,
but how would you be able to? You would first have to define God, and you'd have to be able to definitively demonstrate that morality actually flows from that God.
Yeah, you're gonna have to give saying a sentence is something we can all do. You know what I mean? And that's all we have so far. It's like you have a proposition that you think is true, but and I'm being like extremely charitable by not bringing those things up. Like, okay, so if God just commands you slaughter infants, like 1 Samuel 15:3, you're gonna do it, right? Like, I'm trying to be as charitable as I can to point out that just the concept you're working with isn't. You're basically saying, atheist, you can't sit at the table and have a moral realist view just because you don't think God exists. Okay, well, convince me that I would even need that. You're just saying it.
Right. And I'll say, you guys are not going to offend me. So, I'm not going to be bothered by your arguments.
No, you seem cool. No, I get it. Yeah.
But when it comes to God being the arbiter of morality, I believe that you asked why he would be the standard given his morality in Scripture. And it's not just because Scripture says so. It's because as God as the creator would have the right to do as he wished with his own creation, regardless of what he does. And
how do you know that God is the creator? See, that would be another claim. You just snuck in another claim that God is the creator. What is the evidence that God is the creator?
Well, God states that he has made himself clearly known in and through the creation. That's Romans 1.
Who did he state that to? Because if I'm a part of the creation, he hasn't stated that to me.
Wait, you're a presuppositionalist, aren't you?
Yes, I am, actually.
Yeah, I knew it. I knew you were, because you cited.
Presuppositionalism.
Yeah, because you cited Romans 1:20, I believe, right? Or Romans 1:19. I can't remember. It's Romans. It's in Romans, I believe. But yeah, it's a very common thing. Sorry, Darante, continue.
You're good. You're good.
I can smell the presuppositionalism. But yeah, you seem like a cool presuppositionalist. So that's unique.
For sure, definitely. Yeah. I definitely appreciate the dialogue here.
Yeah, I mean, I want to hear what you guys have to say. I'm not trying to just come on here and hit you in the head with the Bible.
No.
Okay.
It's iron sharpening iron, Daniel.
On the training. You brought up a couple of things. And of course, there's 100 examples we could give in the Bible, whether it was God flooding the earth, God in Isaiah 10 sending the Assyrians against Israel after saying that they had no intention of going, and then punishing them for what he sent them to do, right? And you guys would, of course, argue, how could God be the moral standard when this is the morality we see, right? But that would go back to, I think, my argument. You would have to have some form of foundation to even say that that was immoral for him to do. I would argue, obviously, that as creator, he has the right to do it as he pleases, even above and beyond what he permits us to do.
But now you're seeing the exact reason why I gave the caller the situation I did, because this is the purpose. The purpose is to go, look, by your own lights, do you think that this is wrong? Right? Throwing a baby off a building. And you're like, yeah, and the only purpose of me doing this is to tease out propositions that you accept. So like, for example, that guy on the call said, yeah, it's wrong no matter what. Even if God doesn't exist, it's wrong. So he affirms a proposition, but also affirms in conjunction with that God is necessary for that. In other words, every possible world has God in it and establishes those moral facts, which is a contradiction, because we just identified that he thinks that it would be wrong if God didn't exist in one of those possible worlds and there was moral facts, right? So like the purpose of that is to point out what by your lights. It's because if you go one way and if you go consistent and you say, yeah, it's wrong to throw that baby off the building, or it's not wrong to throw that baby off the building because there's no God there, right? The purpose of that is just to tease that out and to get you to socially say it out loud to people, in front of people, that you don't give a crap about and I'm not saying you specifically, because we haven't got to your view, but if they go that way, the point is what they're saying is they don't care about the intrinsic features of the suffering of the child. They don't care about the intrinsic features of the suffering of the parents. They don't care about the cascading effects about the relationships that are tarnished. I don't know if you know how many people get in divorces after like one of their children die. Like it's like a pretty. I didn't know this. Apparently, it's a pretty high rate. Right? It has a huge cascading effect to the point where if all you care about is whether or not God deems the proposition, then all you've said is those intrinsic features about the suffering, they could be anything. All I need is God to sprinkle the salt on that thing. There's nothing intrinsically holy to that thing that makes it wrong to me. It's just whether or not God gives the green light on certain features in the world. In other words, sprinkles good salt and bad salt and stuff. Because those features still exist. The suffering still exists.
I would say that it would be immoral because God does exist and that baby was made in his image. But as an atheist, let's go with your view for a second. In that world where there is no God, there is no judge, who says that it's wrong to throw that baby off the roof? Who decides that?
If someone's a moral realist and we're stipulating that it's objectively wrong, which is because that's your concern, well, then it's going to, like, there's a lot of ways that people can do that. It can be some necessary fact that's just true in all possible worlds, right? It's just true in all possible worlds. And you could ask the question, yeah, but how do they ground that, or how do they do that? And then you're right back to Darante's thing going, yeah, but I was asking you about God and you're just stating this. How is it different if I'm a moral realist and I just say there are these moral facts out there and that's what grounds them? How is that atheist doing anything different than you? Because both of you haven't given me shit. You know what I mean? And I'm not saying that to be offensive to you. I'm just saying, as the anti-realist, I'm sitting there going, yeah, both these realist positions, quote unquote realist positions, can't meet their burden.
Right. Yeah, you're not going to offend me. But in the Christian worldview, being made in the image of God, we have a consistency to say, like, it's consistent with our worldview to say those things are wrong.
It's consistent with It's consistent with Ted Bundy's worldview to say things are right and wrong, and you can have people be consistent with their moral beliefs.
And I just like to point out, but it's not consistent. According to what you just demonstrated before earlier, you said that if the creator decides to kill that baby, it's his absolute right, which means that's actually not consistent. That means if humans do it, it's wrong. If God does it, it's right, which then therefore actually creates a different standard of morality for God than there is for human. So then again, where would humans be getting their standard of morality from if God's standard of morality is different?
Because God tells us what is right and wrong for us. Of course, he's held to a different standard. He's not like us. He's God.
So it's right and wrong, but it's schmite and schmong in the other case. I mean, that's all you're saying. You're just dividing it. You're saying schmite and schmong and right and wrong. You have different concepts. Yeah. You've divided them into different concepts.
Has higher rights than the creation. The creator.
You can't call them rights. You have to call them schmites. You can't call them rights. You're not using the same concept. This is like the problem. If I ask somebody, hey, someone just I'm used to TikTok and saying graped, but I'm going to continue saying it in case the word triggers anybody. If someone gets essayed, we'll say in an alley and they come around the corner and I don't punish them, or I sit there and I go, you know what, I'm going to punish you after you're done, or you know what, maybe in a couple days I'll do it, or I won't do anything. If I had the power to stop that person and I didn't do it, you'd probably agree with me that that was wrong, right? I have the ability to stop them from essaying somebody and I just decide not to do it. Would you agree that the concept wrong applies there?
I would say it's wrong if you are contradicting something God has said that humans are to do.
Okay.
Now, if
okay, but in your view, all right, we're doing well. In your view, is it wrong to go up to somebody and sexually assault them? Very simple question.
Absolutely.
Okay, great. Now, in that case, I was letting it. I had the ability to stop it, and you agreed that's wrong, right?
If you did not stop it and you had the ability, yes, I would say you were wrong with that.
God, today people got sexually assaulted. He didn't stop it. Yesterday, people got sexually assaulted. He didn't stop it. The day before that, people got sexually assaulted. He didn't stop that. So this is why the wrong schmong, the thing that I'm saying to you matters, because when you apply those concepts of right and wrong, you've moved out of what you just agreed right and wrong was, and you've moved into schmite and schmong. You've just completely talked about a different. We have to use a new word to talk about a new concept now. They're not applicable anymore.
No, but the difference is God is not obligated to stop anything. He commands us and tells us what to do. We don't command him. And secondly, he promises to judge all the world in righteousness. So he does promise that there will be a judgment day for those people that do those things. And third, on what basis?
Okay, I promise I'll punch you when you're done essaying that person. When you come around, I'll punch you in the face. You'll get it. You'll still get to essay them, but I'll punch you in the face.
Because the other gentleman brought up, or maybe it was you, brought up not taking into account that baby's life and the pain the baby is experiencing, or, in the case of the person's sexual assault or whatever. On what basis are any of those things wrong from an atheist perspective? Just because I don't say they are?
Human harm.
There isn't the atheist perspective. Your question is flawed. There isn't the atheist perspective.
It's just, and honestly, I find these types of questions disingenuous, and I actually find it a little terrifying that a human would ask that a human would ask, how can you look at another human being harmed and think that's wrong? I mean, I get that we're trying to make a philosophical argument, but at the same time, what the argument you're proposing is if God tells someone that they should kill their child, that is morally acceptable. That's the argument you're making. And we live in a world where there are people who hear voices in their head, believing it to be God, and follow through on the most heinous activities. And you're kind of saying that's morally acceptable.
No, I'm saying on what basis can you?
He's burden shifting again. He's just going to burden shift this. So
I have a reason.
What was my, hey, just real quick before we move on, what was my comment that I typed to you on YouTube? What was the comment that I left you? What did I identify the problem with your objection? What was it? Can you tell me?
Yeah, you said that I was burden shifting and that I was.
Yeah. What have you done for the last, I don't know, let's see, 17 minutes and 50 seconds when I was extremely charitable trying to talk about different ways that people could do it. I didn't bring up all these examples to try to like, create what is obviously an issue, right? Like Darante bringing those up is a good thing to bring up. I think atheists should bring those up. I was trying to pull it back as much as I can and go a little bit, because I could tell you wanted to talk about like the metaethical side of things. But you haven't read the literature. You don't know about Cornell realists who are atheists. You don't know about moral naturalism. You don't know about moral non-naturalism, like people like Akil Bilgrami who profess views like that. You don't know about any of this stuff, but you confidently sit there. How do you ground it? If you have an epistemic question you can't answer for yourself, that sounds like your problem. It sounds like a problem you could solve by reading the literature. It sounds like a problem that you could solve by. But regardless, right? What we'll do is we'll move on unless you got anything else you want to say. I don't want to end it on a negative light, but if you're just going to do the move of what grounds it there, I've already given you my view, right? I've already told you my view. I don't think anyone holding realism above me is any issue. At the end of the day, I care about the intrinsic suffering of the baby. You only care if God sprinkles the good salt on top of it. That's the view, right? So if you have any
care, why do you care what one evolved flesh bag does?
When somebody kicks a puppy, do you think I reason myself into that belief? Do you think I go, let me think about this? Or do you think there's a psychological fact about me that just goes, I think that's wrong, right? It's a seeming that I have, right? JMike, I don't reason myself into when a baby's thrown off a building. I don't reason myself into going, holy shit, that's fucked up. I don't reason myself into that. That's just what I say.
Know that it's wrong because you are made in the image of God and his law is in you. That's what we mean when.
And you're made in the image of getting dropped. So peace.
Yeah.